Before we begin, major spoilers ahead on certain parts of Avengers Endgame, so if you haven't seen it yet, please click away now. I personally enjoy it, believe it was a great movie, and I wouldn't want to spoil that experience for anyone. For those who have seen it, let's delve right in. So, with Avengers Endgame out, one of the burning questions that came from it was, how could Captain America go back in time and then appear as an old man based on how time travel is supposed to work in this movie? Although the Russo brothers recently explained that he was living a life with Peggy Carter in an alternate timeline, it still brings up a lot of other questions, such as, how did he get back to this reality if he was in an alternate one? How come old Cap didn't reappear in the time machine landing pad like everyone else who goes through the portal? Even Thanos' humongous ship went through the time machine portal landing pad when he first entered our timeline before crashing through the ceiling and went into the sky. It was like, that's the rule. So why didn't good old Cap? As the Red Skull once said in the first Captain America movie, what makes him so special? And Bucky seemed to know old Cap was going to be at the bench waiting for them. Did Bucky and old Cap already meet beforehand, or did young Cap tell Bucky where he was going to wait for them afterwards? Now, the Russo says that's a story for another time possibly, but how can that really be when we know Chris Evans is hanging up his shield for good? So, is this a plot hole? Or is there a reason that makes it possible without breaking the laws that the writers established in the movies? Well, after looking at it thoroughly, I believe there is an alternate take that makes the Russo theory valid. But before we go into that reason, let us first review the laws of time travel based on this movie's rule to ensure we are all on the same page. By the movie's rules, the past cannot be changed of one's own timeline. This is important to remember as it is the basis for everything. This means that whatever happened in the MCU timeline is set in stone. There are no do-overs, at least not without using the time stone anyway. What happened, happened. So, if someone goes back in the past within the MCU timeline and changes the past in any way, it does not affect the MCU timeline. Rather, it merely creates a new alternate timeline. But the original timeline remains unaltered. This was explained several times in the movie, but to me, the best way it was shown was when Hulk and the Ancient One were discussing it, and the Ancient One says in not so many words that if the Time Stone was not returned to her, then although Hulk's timeline will be saved, her timeline will go down a darker path as Doctor Strange wouldn't have access to the Time Stone, which he used to stop Dormammu from destroying the planet Earth and our reality as we know it. So, although the MCU timeline will be fine as it already happened and can't be altered, her timeline will suffer as it has yet to happen. So, for the sake of argument, let's call the main movies we've been watching the MCU timeline, and let's discuss all the timelines that were created based on the Avengers' actions and consequences thereof, and then explore how this relates to the ending with Cap. So, when the Avengers went back in time to the events after the first Avengers movie and attempt to steal the Tesseract, the moment Iron Man from the MCU timeline botches the job and Loki ends up escaping with the Tesseract, a new timeline was formed with new consequences. We will call this timeline Timeline B. Because Loki escaped, it is safe to say the Loki in Timeline B would not experience being captured and forced to work with Thor during Thor the Dark World. And this new Loki most likely would not have had the opportunity to take Odin's place and pretend to be Odin for a number of years between Thor the Dark World and Thor Ragnarok. Obviously, we won't know anything for sure until we see what the Loki series have in store for us, but it is a safe bet they will tread new ground rather than revisit old ones. So, the timeline B Thor will be significantly different as he would have to face off against the Dark Elf alone and possibly wouldn't have Loki's help against Hela if Odin still dies and she resurfaces. Or maybe because Loki is not around playing tricks on his father and putting him in some mental home while taking his father's place, maybe Odin would stay healthy and not die and Hela wouldn't come at all. Either way, this timeline would be different. Now, a second timeline was also created when Nebula from the MCU timeline was captured, and a past Thanos used his Nebula from his timeline to travel back to the MCU timeline. Now, this Thanos from that timeline, which we will call Timeline C, used Nebula to bring his forces to the MCU timeline to attack our remaining heroes. Now, the reason this created a new timeline was because this Thanos from the past and his forces were killed in the MCU timeline. This means in the timeline he left behind, Timeline C, Thanos never gathered the Infinity Stones. Sure, he made a reference that he wanted the Kree judge Ronan the Accuser to find the Power Stone during the events of the Guardians of the Galaxy, but he never got much farther than that in this timeline. So, in Timeline C, sure, the events of the first Avenger movie happened as that was set in 2012, and it was established it was 2014 in Thanos' timeline. Avengers Age of Ultron and possibly Captain America Civil War will also happen as is, as Avengers 2 Age of Ultron is a result of Iron Man's fears from the first Avengers movie, and Captain America Civil War happens as a result of Captain America Winter Soldier and Avengers Age of Ultron. But the people in Timeline C will never experience the events of Avengers Infinity War or Avengers Endgame. As stated, their Thanos died in our MCU timeline during the final act of Avengers Endgame. So their Thanos will never choke Loki to death or stab Heimdall or attack Thor's ship at the beginning of the Avengers Infinity War in Timeline C. There will never be a snap that kills half the population in the universe, causing a 5-year gap of those people who died from the snap. And there will be no need for Iron Man and Black Widow to sacrifice themselves to bring everyone back and stop Thanos. Because Thanos died in our MCU timeline. So now, let's get back to Cap. At the end of the movie, Captain America returned the Infinity Stones to the same moment of time it was taken, and then he decided to stay in the past and make it work with Peggy Carter. And based on the ring on his finger, they obviously got married. But yet, should he have been able to return to the moment of the MCU timeline, especially since by the story's rules, he clearly did not use the time machine as he didn't exit the time portal pad like everyone else did previously. And Hulk saying Cap overshot the mark most likely meant that Cap overshot his mark of returning to this exact moment in time, not place. In fact, that was probably when he went to the past back to around 1950 and stayed with Agent Carter. So what does that mean? Wouldn't he have created an alternate timeline the moment he went back to the past based on the rules that were set by the movie, and had to live his life in the timeline he created? And the answer to that is yes, which means for him to be able to return to his friends as an elder man without using the time portal, he most likely had to do it the old-fashioned way. Live through it. which means the MCU timeline that we've been watching for the past 10 years is not the original timeline at all, but the alternate timeline of Captain America staying in the past. So when Peggy Carter tells how she met her husband in 1953 during an old videotape in Captain America Winter Soldier, she is in fact referring to Captain America, who probably told her everything, and together they just kept the ruse going and hid his identity to the rest of the world so events can flow naturally. That would also explain why there were no pictures of the husband when Captain America visited Peggy during that movie. Now, make no mistake, I do not believe when the writers created Winter Soldier they thought this far ahead. This is what many writers call happy accidents, when pieces that were never planned fit into places in unexpected ways that could possibly take the writer in new directions or provide new revelations never thought of previously. But the pieces do fit. And for any who wonder why Captain America would sit this one out when he could possibly warn them of the threat of Thanos or stop many other incidents like Hydra infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D., Bucky killing Tony's parents, Civil War, Ultron, and other events from happening, it is because he must let things play out the way it did. Captain America is a strategist as well as an inspirational symbol to many. And there's a good chance either Doctor Strange told him or he realized it himself that if he did anything different, Thanos would win, as there was only one chance for victory out of 14 million. And Captain America had to look at the bigger picture. Keep in mind, the deaths of Tony's parents fueled Tony to be more innovative and creative and be the Iron Man he became. The Iron Man that was able to defeat Thanos. So if this is not the original timeline, then what actually happened in the original timeline? Most likely the same thing, with the only exception being that Peggy either married someone else or simply didn't marry at all. But all the other events will happen pretty much the same. Except for when Captain America returned to the past, he would not come back to that timeline to pass the shield to Falcon. He would have created a new timeline, our MCU timeline, which mirrors his and passed the shield there. And since our Captain America from the MCU timeline also goes back to the past but does not alter the timeline, then most likely both Caps collapse and merge into one person at that point, creating a nice little time loop where Cap can exist within the MCU timeline because he does not alter the timeline. And for those who might not like the feeling that the MCU timeline was not the original timeline, if you really wish to think about it, the real original timeline is Earth 616, aka the Marvel Comics. And the movies are just an alternate timeline of those comics. So we shouldn't feel bad or cheated that we are watching an alternate universe, because we always were. But enough about that. Tell me what you think of the theory. Does it work? Does it not work? Give me your thoughts. I would like to know. Until next time, please, if you like, hit the like button and subscribe to see more.